Hello, welcome to Stretford Paddock. My name is Joe and I'm joined by ESPN's Rob Dawson. How you doing, Rob?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming down. We're here at the MCG in the background there.
Lovely.
Pretty impressive stadium, isn't it?
Lovely. Great place for a friendly.
Yeah, really good place for a friendly. You wouldn't want to play every 40 games a season with...
No, probably not. But it's nice to come to these places, isn't it? And see the football games in big iconic stadiums. It's great.
Yeah, really good. We're going to ask you obviously a few things. United transfers, latest on Ten Hag's sort of training methods and what's been going on behind the scenes there. We'll jump straight into it. Frankie De Jong is... I think saga is... We need another word above saga at this point. I think that seemed to be the biggest adjective you could use in the past, and now that's not enough. Or, noun, sorry. And yet, somehow, this deal isn't done. We don't look any closer to it being done. There's talks of his wages and his contract and all this sort of thing. What is the latest with Frankie De Jong as far as you're aware? Because depending on who you read, it's either one step away from being done or he's going to Bayern Munich. The last I heard.
Yeah, I mean, it is a bit of a different one. Obviously, United get involved or seem to get involved in these kind of things most summers. But this is a little bit different in that usually it's about whether they can agree a fee with the club. You kind of just look past the fact that the player's got a will as well, and we always just assume that the player wants to come to Man United, and there's nothing else kind of going on around it. And this is a little bit different in that United and Barcelona seem to have quite a broad agreement about fee and payment structure and all the difficult stuff. But yet, as you say, the deal's not done, and there's so many other moving parts around it. Just looking in from the outside. The wage deferral is complicated, and obviously most people will know that he agreed to defer wages to help Barcelona through COVID. Yeah. He agreed that those wages would be repaid throughout the rest of his contract. Obviously, I think that contract runs till 2026, and they're talking about sort of 20 million euros worth of wages, which is quite a lot of money to anyone, even a professional footballer. And then you've got the other side of it as well, in that there hasn't been an awful lot of noises from De Jong's side that he actually wants to come. He wants to play in the Champions League. I think he's quite settled in Barcelona. It was his dream move. He's bought a house there. His wife is settled there. So it is quite complicated. I think last time I was on here, you asked me whether I thought it would get done, and I said, yeah, I think so. Eventually, it's just one of those. It'll drag on. It'll get done eventually, but the more it drags on, and the closer that we get to sort of the end of the tour and the start of the Premier League, and then further towards the deadline, you do start to worry whether this is actually going to get done at all now.
It's interesting, like I said, we almost forget about the will of the player. Although it seems to be the case that if the player wants to move, they get a move these days, and if the club wants the player to move, they move. It's interesting and quite rare to see, actually, I'm not going. And when we're seeing the opposite with Ronaldo, which we'll talk about in a minute, where the player wants to move and the club's going, well, you can't. But yeah, it's a strange one with Frankie, and maybe this is all part of that. Like you said, it is dragging on. We all thought it might. Yeah. It still could happen, do you think? Or do you think it's getting to the point where we're going to have to look elsewhere?
I mean, it's possible. I mean, the strange thing about the whole thing is that if you talk privately to Man United, they are convinced that he wants to come. Yeah. They're convinced that they're not going to go this far down the line in a deal just to be told by the player, no, you're all right. Because it's taken, weeks and weeks of work just to get to this point. I know that fans will go, well, what work? But it has. Work has been done behind the scenes to get to this point. You listen then to De Jong's side, or noise coming out of his representatives or Spain, and it sounds like he's just not interested at all. And it's very rare to have two polar opposites like that. You kind of get a sense that maybe it's moving one way or the other, and you don't really with this, which is quite odd. Obviously, it's a bit of a moot point until they can solve this wage issue. Yeah. United are adamant that they aren't going to pay that, and I actually don't think they can pay it to do with sort of tax and legal reasons and stuff. It has to come from Barcelona's side, and they're kind of putting pressure on De Jong to kind of swallow it a little bit and say, look, can you help the club out, please, and just move and help us out. And he's thinking, well, why?
Yeah, you haven't helped me out.
I want money. You're not helping me out, so why would I want to help you out? I mean, in terms of replacements, I thought it was quite interesting that Ten Hag said in his interviews yesterday that he kind of suggested that he may look inside the club for a replacement. I mean, there are players like Tielemans at Leicester who, they could go and get, and you imagine that would be quite easy to do, given that he hasn't got long left on his contract, and Leicester can't afford to let a player like that leave for free. But from what Ten Hag was saying yesterday, he suggested that he would rather look inside the club, and then the list of possible replacements or the players who could play in that position are quite short. I mean, you could probably list them on one hand.
Yeah, it's interesting, and we've seen sort of the rise of Zidane Iqbal, who can play a similar role to that, Charlie Savage. But again, these are players that have played single-digit minutes for Manchester United. It would be hard to say, professional minutes. It'd be hard to say you come and do that role that Frankie De Jong was supposed to do. And I think a lot of fans not necessarily dread, but don't particularly look forward to another season of McTominay and Fred being that sort of double pivot there that we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years.
And that's where we're at.
Yeah.
The two players who could possibly do that, Fred obviously one, McTominay, possibly together, but like you say, together as a pair, they've developed quite a bad reputation. Not from anyone else. I think just fans kind of look at it and go, it's quite safe and defensive. Beyond that, James Garner possibly, but again hasn't really played this summer because he's been injured. Again, it would be a risk because he's quite young and he hasn't really played in the Premier League, if at all. Charlie Savage has done brilliantly on the tour and looked really sharp, but again, are you going to throw him into a Premier League season? The same with Zidane. Probably not. It's a massive, massive risk to be able to do that. The options are quite limited, and I was surprised that Ten Hag was so brash about it yesterday. He was kind of like, well, we'll just find someone here. And it's like, well, who?
I wonder if that's more of a suggestion of his confidence in the De Jong deal than a genuine reflection of what he thinks the squad's capable of. Because surely if he wants De Jong, he's essentially saying, I don't think this squad is good enough. And then all of a sudden to go, well, if it's him on, I don't want anything. It's almost like sort of throwing the toys out the pram a little bit, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, the suggestions from the club is that De Jong is so much his ideal player that he just wants to push that as far as he can until he knows for sure whether it's happening or not, and that the other alternatives in terms of quality are quite a lot down the list, in terms of a level. And Ten Hag doesn't really seem like the type of bloke to want to compromise that easily. I mean, I thought that when Martinez came in that there would, people at the club would kind of say, well, he can play midfield, and he has done occasionally. But again, the suggestions from the club are that he will play on the left side of at centre half, and that really he's not looking at him as a central midfield, even though he can do the job. And he kind of said, he can play a couple of other positions, that he's not bringing him in to looking at him thinking, well, he could be my long-term holding midfield player.
No. So just finally on that, like I said, I asked you last time, I'll ask you again. Do you think the Young deal will get done?
I can remember being quite confident last time.
I remember I was sat there thinking, right, great, that's sorted then. Put that rubber stamp that.
We've been through this so many times that when when one club wants to sell and one club wants to buy, and because it's such a big club, Man United, the deal tends to be done. And again, it is a bit of a strange situation in that you kind of hear from the player that you maybe not that interested. I'm gonna say that I think it will get done. I'm not as confident as I was when we last did this at all, and I think it may drag on and on and on, possibly all the way to deadline day. If I was a betting man, I'd still say it would get done, but I'm not as confident as I was.
You still said it get done. That's all that matters. Talking about Ten Hag, then obviously you spoke to him yesterday, and we've seen sort of glimpses and hearing things about his sort of strictness and his kind of he seems to be very sort of straightforward. This is what we're doing, and there's no deviation from that. Are you a fan of what you're hearing from him and what you're hearing about him? Because to me, it seems like the first manager we've had where, certainly since Ferguson, where it feels as though it genuinely, there's a respect to him, not just from the players but from the media as well, and the fans. Everyone seems to be on board now. Every other manager you can sort of go through. Moyes, he didn't have the experience at the top level. Van Gaal, he sort of passed his best. Jose gets sacked every 2 years anyway, so what's the point in getting your hopes up? And then obviously Ole didn't really have the experience either. Ten Hag seems to be the first time where we've had a manager that is on the up. He's only ever been successful. He said it himself yesterday. He said, I've got the best out of players everywhere I've been. He's the first manager we've had since Fergie who can really say that. Do you think that there's a lot of promise here that we haven't seen for a long time at Manchester United?
Yeah, I'd probably agree with that. I think collectively, if you include the fans, the media, the players, I think collectively it feels like a lot of that is behind this manager. Like you said, that there was always something with others. Rightly or wrongly, Moyes didn't have the experience at a top club, and Van Gaal was past his best, all that kind of stuff. And I can understand that in the past, fans, whether it's fans, media, or players, have had a little bits of doubts about managers coming in. But it does feel like it's the first time where I haven't really heard from media or players or fans a lot of negatives really. Obviously there was that whole Pochettino thing, and I'm sure there are fans listening to this thinking, well, I'd rather have Pochettino, but I don't think it's a massive group where they think this is a wrong choice, we shouldn't have hired Ten Hag. And I think even just judging by the summer, that they would be quite impressed with what they've heard. And that quote that you've mentioned there from yesterday I thought was the most impressive out of everything from Ten Hag, because he could have wilted a little bit with those questions about what's success, or can you challenge City and Liverpool? He could have just said, well, no, and he didn't. He chose not to. And I think he could have said that we're going to get nowhere near City and Liverpool, and people would have gone, obviously that's fair. But he chose not to, and he sat there and he was so confident and said, I've been successful everywhere, so why shouldn't I think that I'm going to be successful here as well? And to hear a manager say that, particularly with what's gone in the past at Man United for the last 10 years, I think it's quite refreshing, really.
Definitely. I think there were certainly points under Ole where it was almost like fans, media, everyone. It was just sort of open season. Like, we could win 10 games in a row and then you lose one and he's a failure and he's not good enough. And whereas with Ten Hag, there does seem to be maybe even a respect there that I haven't seen so sort of unilaterally from everyone who's observing him. And hopefully that'll give him that extra sort of almost bit of leeway when things do start to go a bit wrong. People aren't going to turn him immediately. I think that's probably quite a crucial thing for him. In terms of his training methods and the stuff we're seeing behind the scenes, I'll ask you a bit more about sort of transfers and stuff later on, so we'll come back to that. What are you hearing about how the players are responding and how whether he's impressed or not by the players? Maguire's someone that's obviously got loads of talk about him all the time. He's the captain. He's, again, someone who hasn't necessarily fared very well on social media and in the press. But Ten Hag seems to be backing him. He's saying, again, he's captain. He's not going to play just because he's captain, but he seems to be saying he's my centre-back and he's going to be starting. Are you surprised by that?
A little bit, only because there are other players there who can play. Just last summer that spent a lot of money on Rafael Varane, who's won however many Champions Leagues and been successful in Spain. He's one of the came in with a reputation of being one of the top centre halves in the world, and judging by Ten Hag's comments the last couple of days, it would suggest that it's going to be Martinez and Maguire with Varane sort of playing second fiddle, and then you've got Lindelof and Bailly. So I was a little bit surprised, but it may just be part of Ten Hag's man management skills. He was asked straight away in that first press conference in Bangkok about the captaincy, and there was no woman in R, and there was no I'm going to think about it or I'll make a decision before the first game of the Premier League season. He was straight down the middle and said it's going to be Harry Maguire. He's been successful, and he's going to be my captain. And I know that probably caused a bit of a storm with United fans because of all the things you've mentioned. He, having a poor season and hasn't fared particularly well with supporters. But it must give Harry quite a big boost. That he must have returned to the club this summer thinking, I need to impress this guy. Am I going to play every week? I've had a poor season. He even admitted it himself in a Q&A the other day. But it must give him a massive boost to hear the manager come in and say, "You're my captain. You're a first choice player. You're probably going to play every week." But you do still have to impress me. So there was that kind of. It wasn't like you're going to play every week regardless. There was kind of that that little edge as well. We're not just going to pick you for the sake of picking you. But I think it's important to give these players a boost, particularly Harry Maguire, because of what happened last season. Yeah,
I was going to say that people are underestimating maybe the fact that he is a manager. He's not just a coach and a tactician. You are a manager the same way that someone who's a manager of Marks and Spencer's, part of your job is making sure your team is happy and in the best state to do their work to the best of their ability. Do you think there's a way back for Maguire? Just in terms of public opinion? Because the other day, that goal against Melbourne, obviously we won the game 4-1, and yet if you go on social media, you would assume that we'd lost 3-0 and Maguire had scored 3 own goals on purpose. And it's not to mention the fact that Luke Shaw was out of position, Lindelof was out of position, but because Maguire's pace was sort of exposed a little bit as the ball comes across, it's now Maguire's fault again. Have you seen a player be in the position that Maguire's in and turn that reputation back around again?
That's a tough question. At Man United, there's not one that springs to mind straight away. I mean, Luke Shaw possibly under Jose. He looked like he was out the door, and there were times when he looked like his confidence was completely shot, and it was just like, Luke's going to have to leave to sort of revitalise his own career. And then he came back and had that wonderful season under Solskjaer and got in the England team and almost won the Euros. I think there probably is a way back for Harry. Because people forget that first season he came in under Ollie, that they finished second in the league, and I think they had the second or third best defensive record in the Premier League. So he's obviously not a bad player. You don't turn into a bad player overnight. I thought it was interesting that in one of the press conferences, the last press conference, that Marcus Rashford said that it's hard to come back into a team and make mistakes in a team that are losing, and it's almost impossible to kind of get away with that. And I think that was the case with Harry Maguire last season, that it just kept happening. It was just a snowball effect where every single game there seemed to be something, even if it wasn't something that led to a goal, or even if it was a game that United had won, there was always something. People were just looking at him every single game, and he was under a microscope. Hopefully this season, organisationally, it'll be a little bit better. They'll defend better as a group, and then you'll kind of just, the microscope on Harry may diminish a little bit, because I think that's what needs to happen. I don't for a minute think that he's a bad player.
No.
Because you just don't. That just doesn't happen in professional football. I think it's to do with his confidence, and we've talked a little bit about Ten Hag giving him that. Obviously, it's going to be very, very important for him to have a strong start to the season, because again, it's not a case where he's going to play every week because there's no one else. If he starts that first game of the season with Martinez and it doesn't go well, the clamour for Varane to come in is going to be absolutely massive. And I don't know if you survive that. If a player like Varane comes in and plays well, then you're not getting back in the team.
Yeah, it's interesting that some of the midfield, like last season,
exactly.
You saw midfielders, having bad games and everyone going, get Donny in.
Yeah.
And then you've got someone of the stature of Varane, who is, far and above the reputation of Donny van der Beek. If he's waiting in the wings for Maguire to make a mistake, I don't think you'll get too many really. But hopefully he can turn that around, because I think, like I said, he's a good player. He's obviously the captain, and regardless of almost who it is, you don't want your club captain having constant stories around them and constant criticism, because that's a big, sort of politically, a big part of the club, that isn't it, that you need to be going smoothly.
It is. It's another symptom of the size of Man United. In other clubs, you probably get away with that. And again, Harry's probably learning to deal with that himself now. He's been at Hull, he's been even at Leicester, where you can get away with making a couple of mistakes. People don't really notice that much, because no disrespect to Leicester, but you're not under that intense scrutiny every single week. And you come to Man United, the ball gets rolled back to you off the kickoff, and you make a mistake and punt it out for a throw in. It's like the worst thing that's ever happened. Yeah. And that is very hard to deal with, especially if you've not kind of grown up at a massive club like Man United. So it is probably something he's still learning with. As I said, I think if he has a good start to the season, United defend well, keep a couple of clean sheets, I think that it'll be fine. The problem is that last season we saw this snowball effect where it was just like, there's no way back. And if that begins to happen again, you've got a player like Varane waiting, it's going to be very, very tough for him.
Right, we'll get back to that in a second. But first of all, we need to talk about the burning issue there. And your issues won't be burning if you use Manscaped on your balls. Because this summer, you need to look after yourself, don't you? You need to groom yourself. And thanks to Paddock, you can. Using the code PADDOCKTOUR, you can go to Manscaped, you get 20% off and free shipping. And they're giving away loads. You get a free travel bag. You get the boxer brief. So you get the crop preserver. You get the crop toner. Because let's face it, we've all been there in the summer. Bit hot, bit sweaty, bit smelly down there. Listen, it happens to the best of us, even me. But thanks to Manscaped, you can look after yourself. You can smell lovely. You can look clean and crisp. And you can have none of that little sort of nicks and cuts because of their anti-nick technology as well. You've got the Lawnmower 4.0, you've got the crop preserver, the crop toner, you've got the anti-chafing boxer briefs. What more do you want? You've even got the travel bag to put it all in, and you've got 20% off, and you've got free shipping. So it is all happening, because you don't have to have one of those situations where you're there with the torch on your phone trying to do your clean your bits, because they've got the LED light on there as well. They've got the multifunctional on-off switch, because let's face it, you don't want it just only on or only off. You want it on or off. So go out and check out Manscaped. There's a link in the description. The code's PADDOCKTOUR. Your balls will thank you. Well, let's get back to this interview.
You mentioned there Martinez in terms of potentially playing next to Maguire. There's been a lot of talk around his height and the fact that he's coming from a league where it's not necessarily the best kind of translation to the Premier League. Ten Hag was speaking about him yesterday about his aggression and his determination. He almost spoke about that more than his sort of playing ability. Do you think that mentality is something United have missed? Because that seemed to be almost Ten Hag's kind of main reason for buying him, is he'll bring I can't remember the exact word he used, but an aggression and a determination and that sort of physical attributes.
I think so. He spoke about him yesterday, and he's talking about that South American spirit, which immediately makes you think of someone like Marcos Rojo, who just wants to destroy people every week. I use the word warrior as well, which if you go through that squad, there's a lot of good players. But I'm not sure you would describe many of them as warriors.
No.
Which again, you need players with technical ability and you can score goals, all that kind of stuff. But you do need a bit of fight and a bit of battle. It obviously goes a long way in the Premier League, and it does sound like a lot of the characteristics that United have been missing, and some of the key reasons why Ten Hag has decided to buy him, because obviously there are, there's an issue over his height. He was asked yesterday about that, and he just said he's not really that bothered. He's got a great jump on him. He said he was good in the air anyway. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be 6'5" to be able to head a football, and he's right. He's a player that he knows particularly well, and that's, for United fans, that should be quite comforting. He knows exactly what he's getting. I'm sure he's not expecting him to come to Man United and be something that he's not. He's had him at Ajax. He knows exactly what he can do, exactly what he can't do. And that would suggest that he knows the way to play him.
Just moving on from that a little bit then, Cristiano Ronaldo is another person that Ten Hag was talking about yesterday, again reiterating that he's staying. He might even stay for the extra year. That almost felt like a little that was a little word to Cristiano Ronaldo, like, we've got an extra year option on this. You're staying for 2 years if I want you to. Do you think this is all sort of bargaining and politics, or do you think he's really sat there thinking, I don't care that you want to go, you're going to be here next season whether you like it or not?
I think so. I mean, again, it's hard with these kind of things, whether to read too much into it and say they are trying to sort of bargain with him and maybe drive the price of all that kind of stuff. But in this situation, I actually don't think that's true. I think he genuinely is planning to have him next season. There hasn't been an awful lot of links with out and out centre forwards. Obviously, we were quite happy with how Anthony Martial started pre-season with a couple of goals. But I genuinely think he is banking on having him up front next season. And I thought it was interesting yesterday in his interviews that Ten Hag has got appears to have a very strict style of football in the way that he wants to play, in the formations that he wants to play. But he suggested yesterday that he may want to build his team around Ronaldo, that it's hard to find players who can score goals, so you need to find the way to get the best out of them. And if that means kind of adjusting your own style a little bit, then so be it. And I thought that was quite interesting, because I didn't think that he was that type of manager. I thought he was someone to come in and said, this is the way we're playing. We're going to play 4-3-3, and we're going to play this way. We're going to press all over the pitch, and if you can't do it, you're out. And he didn't really suggest that. I'm sure that Ronaldo was going to have to, do a little bit of that. But there was a suggestion from him that players that score goals are at a massive premium, and that obviously you don't win games if you don't score goals, and the aim will be to get the best out of him.
I think that's a good point, though. But I think it's easy to forget as football fans generally, but certainly United fans, that look how bad we were last season, and whether you want to attribute that to Ronaldo's presence being there, I think it's hard to say that that's the case without being in the dressing room. But what we do know is Ronaldo still got 20 plus goals in a team that barely scored and couldn't stop drawing and losing matches. So if you've got a team that is functioning well, like you said, almost with Rashford, where the mistakes are focused on when you're losing. Imagine if we're playing well and winning games, he's going to get 25 goals without any problems whatsoever. It's just, do you worry that a Cristiano Ronaldo who doesn't want to be there would hinder the ability for Ten Hag to get his team playing well?
I mean, I guess that's the question for the next couple of weeks. He's not going to come out on tour now. It's far too late. There's no point in him flying out to Melbourne or going on to Perth. I think there's 2 weeks after they get back on tour before the start of the season, so it'll depend on how quickly he's back, how quickly all this kind of furore around him dissipates. I think it's really important that he is back in Manchester that first Monday when they get back and training on the Tuesday, because the longer that he's absent, this circus is just going to carry on and on. What I would say is that I think there are lots of people at United who don't genuinely believe that he wants to go.
Right.
That he's very aware of his situation at 37 years old. His wage demands, there aren't that many takers. Again, the clubs that have been mentioned, lots of them have already said that they don't want him. The other ones, like Atletico Madrid, could they afford him? Could he possibly even go back to Atletico after he's played Real Madrid? Probably not. There's lots of people at United that thought that him he didn't come out, did he? But his representatives had kind of made it known that he wasn't particularly happy. It was more of like a kick up the backside, in that he'd asked at the end of last season where the club was going, and what the chances were of success next season, and the players who might come in. And I think he got a little bit frustrated in that lots of that was taking time. I think there's plenty of people at United who think that he doesn't genuinely want to go, that he's happy here as long as his promises are met, or these promises that were given to him are met, that he's happy to stay. And at the moment, it looks like he will do.
Interesting, isn't it? That he is in a position where he's one of the greatest players of all time, and yet seemingly there aren't that many clubs that would want him in their squad at the moment.
Yeah, and it's tough. I understand from his point of view that he's obviously massively disappointed that he's not going to be playing in the Champions League. He's not going to be playing in the Champions League at Man United. But I just thought the timing was strange, in that everyone knew in April that United weren't going to play in the Champions League, and he gave an interview post that saying how happy he was about Ten Hag and how excited he was to start playing. And then 2 months later, he's suddenly sort of suggesting that he wants to leave.
Yeah.
The timing of that doesn't really stack up, in my opinion. I can understand that at 37 years old, and after the career he's had, he wants to be in the Champions League every week. But again, he will have known that there weren't going to be that many takers. Even teams like Chelsea, Bayern Munich, again Atletico Madrid, Can they afford him? Is there a spot for him in their squads? He will have known that there wasn't a massive market for him. It's not like he's 26 where every club in the world wants to sign him. Ronaldo is more aware of his career than anyone else, and he will have known that full well, that there wasn't going to be a massive market. So whether it is a kick up the backside for Man United or not, only Ronaldo will know. But at the moment, there isn't that much noise about him moving, and Ten Hag has been very, very firm in what he said about wanting him to stay and be part of the squad next year. And at the moment, it looks like he will be.
Do you think he will be here next season if it was,
I think so. I mean, I just can't see any way that he leaves. United have been absolutely adamant that he's not going. In terms of a transfer fee for a 37-year-old with a year left in his contract, you're looking at sort of like 15 million euros tops, and then that doesn't give United anything to go into the market to buy a centre forward anyway, so it's probably not even worth their while. I mean, just in terms of Ronaldo's contract, the number of teams that can take on those wages, it's probably about 2 or 3, and one of those is PSG, and they've got a front three that anyone in the world would want, so there's probably not a spot for him there anyway. So I can't see it. I mean, maybe it'll be proved wrong, and by deadline day he'll be gone, but sat here now, I just can't see it.
No. Just moving on to sort of other transfers a little bit. You said there about Ten Hag looking within slightly, but there's still rumours of Antony and different other players in different positions. Tielemans is another one that's been mentioned. Is there anyone else that you think United could go in for if De Jong doesn't pan out, or do you think it's kind of De Jong or nothing at this point?
I think at the moment it's probably De Jong or nothing, and I only say that because we've still got a little bit of time before the deadline. I think it's the end of August, so there is a little bit of time to sort that out. In terms of the others, Ten Hag was looking for a versatile forward. There's no secret that he quite likes Antony, but I think Ajax have priced him out of any kind of move. It seemed like they were in talks a couple of weeks ago, and it's gone quite quiet now. I think they were after sort of 80 million euros, which United A, didn't want to pay, and B, couldn't afford anyway. So I think that seems like it might be dead in the water unless Ajax reduce their price. I mean, Tielemans is an interesting one because he's obviously a very good player. He's proven in the Premier League. I think it's no secret that he wants to leave Leicester. Again, I think it would be quite easy to do because Leicester can't afford to let him leave for free. It's whether Ten Hag wants to turn his attention to a player who he believes is not quite as good as De Jong. I think the whole thing with De Jong suggests that if they can agree some kind of deal with this wages deferral, or whether Barcelona in the end want to pay it, that they are convinced that De Jong wants to come, because he's made no secret of the fact that he needs a ball playing holding midfield player. And it's whether he thinks that he can go into the season with what he's already got. Again, in his interview yesterday, he was quite bullish about that. But fans will look at that squad and go, "Well, we're in the same position as we were 2 years ago or last season, and it didn't work." Ten Hag must feel that he's going to get De Jong. It's all very well asking me and asking media and journalists, but Ten Hag must believe that he's going to get him, because I don't think they would go this far down the road without knowing that he wants to come.
And also that he's got his phone number, hasn't he? Like, there's been reports that he's been ringing him and in contact with him. There's no way he's rang De Jong up and gone, "Do you want to come to United?" And he's gone, "No," phone down, and then he's gone, "Get him anyway."
Exactly.
Like, there must be some word that he'd be willing to get that done.
I mean, look, the days of sort of tapping up are kind of long gone now. That you have all these back channels, whether it's to the player directly or whether it's through agents or intermediaries. There are ways of finding out these things. United have been absolutely hammered for the way that they've gone about their transfer business the last couple of years. This is meant to be a new start with John Murtagh and Darren Fletcher and a new structure. I would like to believe there is absolutely no way that United are risking getting to a point where on deadline day he stays, and then the day after he gives an interview to some Spanish newspaper and goes, "I told them straight away that I didn't want to come."
Yeah.
There's no.
They can't. They surely can't face that. They can't.
That would be the worst of the lot. That would just
be
be season ticket in the bin. Right, I'm not watching these anymore, because that would just be ridiculous.
Yeah, we've wasted all summer going after a player that we knew didn't want to join us 6 weeks ago.
I don't want to sound like too pessimistic, but it has happened with players like Fabregas, but that was sort of 10 years ago. We're meant to have been a different stage of how United go about their business. Look, we're not going to know until we know, but I would like to think that we're not going to be in a situation where that happens, because that would just be absolutely disastrous.
It would. And that's a great place to end our chat, I think. Thank you very much, Rob, for joining us. Where can people find you on social media?
On Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Rob Dawson, ESPN.
Yeah, we'll put his link in the description as well. Thank you very much for joining us at home. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. We will be live for all of the breaking news from Manchester United this summer, as well as interviews, news and podcasts as well. So make sure you hit subscribe. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you in a bit.